What happens when one of the biggest pop stars in the world sits down for what should be a routine late-night interview, but instead finds herself in the middle of a career-defining confrontation that no one saw coming? Tonight, we're diving into the explosive exchange between Lady Gaga and Jimmy Kimmel that had everyone talking. This wasn't your typical celebrity chat. This was a verbal battleground where egos clashed, tempers flared, and ultimately led to something unprecedented in late-night television history. Make sure you subscribe and drop a comment below because you won't believe how this unfolds. Jimmy Kimmel adjusted his tie as the cameras rolled, his trademark grin plastered across his face as he turned to his guest. Lady Gaga sat across from him, resplendent in a sequined blazer that caught the studio lights, her platinum blonde hair styled in vintage Hollywood waves. The audience was electric with anticipation. "So, Stefani," Jimmy began, using her real name with casual familiarity, "you've been making headlines again with your latest album, but I have to ask about something that's been buzzing on social media. There are some pretty harsh critics out there saying your new direction is, well, let's just say they're not impressed." Gaga's smile faltered for just a moment, barely perceptible to most viewers, but the cameras caught it. "Jimmy, I think art should challenge people. If everyone loved everything I did, I wouldn't be pushing boundaries, would I?" Right, Jimmy nodded. But there was something in his tone that suggested he wasn't quite satisfied with that answer. "But don't you think there's a difference between pushing boundaries and, I don't know, maybe losing touch with what made people fall in love with your music in the first place?" The audience shifted slightly, sensing a change in the usual dynamic. This wasn't the softball questioning they were used to seeing on late-night talk shows. Gaga leaned forward slightly, her voice maintaining its composure, but with an edge creeping in. "Are you suggesting I've lost touch with my fans, Jimmy?" "I'm not suggesting anything," Jimmy replied, his hands raised in mock surrender, though his expression remained challenging. "I'm just reading what's out there. Some people are saying you've become too focused on being an artist with a capital, eh? And maybe forgotten about being an entertainer." "Entertainer," Gaga repeated, the word hanging in the air like a challenge. "Jimmy, I've been entertaining people since I was performing in dive bars on the Lower East Side. I've sold millions of albums, won Grammy Awards, and Oscar. What exactly are you implying?" Jimmy chuckled, but it wasn't his usual warm laugh. "Hey, I'm just the messenger here. But since you brought up awards, let's talk about your Oscar win. Some industry insiders have been saying that whole campaign was pretty calculated, that you played up the struggling artist angle when you've been wealthy for years." The studio audience was now completely silent. Even the band members looked uncomfortable. This was territory that late-night hosts rarely ventured into with their guests. Gaga's jaw tightened visibly. "Calculated, Jimmy? I poured my heart and soul into that performance, into that role. The fact that you would reduce it to some kind of publicity stunt shows exactly the kind of cynicism that's poisoning this industry." Whoa, Jimmy said, holding up his hands again, but his tone was anything but apologetic. "I'm not being cynical, I'm being realistic. This is Hollywood, Stefani. Everything is calculated to some degree. Your whole persona, the meat dress, the little monsters, the constant reinvention, it's all brand management." "Brand management?" Gaga's voice rose slightly, her famous composure starting to crack. "Jimmy, you sit here night after night making jokes about celebrities, profiting off other people's work and personal lives, and you want to lecture me about authenticity." The audience gasped audibly. This was unprecedented territory for a late-night talk show. Jimmy's smile finally disappeared completely. "Now hold on a second. I think you're out of line here. I've been nothing but supportive of your career. I've had you on this show multiple times." "Supportive?" Gaga laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Jimmy, you just spent the last 5 minutes questioning my integrity as an artist, suggesting my Oscar win was fake, and implying that my entire career is some kind of elaborate marketing scheme. If that's your idea of support, I'd hate to see what hostility looks like. I'm asking the questions that people want answered, Jimmy shot back, his own professional mask starting to slip. That's my job. Maybe if you weren't so defensive about legitimate criticism, we could have an actual conversation here. Legitimate criticism? Gaga stood up slightly in her chair, her voice growing stronger. Jimmy, there's a difference between criticism and character assassination. What you're doing right now isn't journalism. It's tabloid gossip dressed up as legitimate inquiry. Jimmy's face was reddening now. Character assassination? Are you serious right now? I'm asking you about things that are already public knowledge, things that your own industry peers are saying. Which peers, Jimmy? Name them. Give me specifics instead of hiding behind vague accusations and anonymous sources. I don't have to name anyone to you, Jimmy replied, his voice taking on a sharper edge. This isn't a courtroom, it's a talk show. Exactly, Gaga said, pointing a perfectly manicured finger at him. It's a talk show, not an interrogation. But you seem to have confused the two. The tension in the studio was palpable now. Audience. Members were looking at each other uncertainly, unsure whether this was part of some elaborate bit, or if they were witnessing a genuine meltdown of professional courtesy. Jimmy tried to regain control of the situation. Look, let's just take a step back here. I think maybe we got off on the wrong foot. No, Jimmy, Gaga interrupted, her voice now carrying the full power of her theatrical training. I think we got off on exactly the foot you intended. You brought me here tonight not to promote my work or to have a genuine conversation, but to ambush me with gossip and innuendo. Ambush you? Jimmy's voice cracked slightly with indignation. Lady Gaga, you are being completely unreasonable. I'm doing my job as a host. Your job is to make your guests comfortable and create entertaining television, Gaga fired back. What you're doing is trying to create viral moments at my expense. Jimmy stood up from his desk, something that rarely happened during interviews unless it was planned. You know what? Maybe you're right. Maybe this was a mistake. Maybe having someone on who can't handle basic questions about their career wasn't the best booking decision. The words hung in the air like a slap. Gaga stared at him for a long moment, her expression cycling through hurt, anger, and finally settling on something that looked like resolve. Basic questions? She said quietly, but her voice carried perfectly in the now silent studio. Jimmy, if you think what you've been doing tonight constitutes basic questions, then you've lost all perspective on what this job is supposed to be about. She stood up from her chair, the sequins on her blazer catching the harsh studio lights like armor. The audience held its collective breath as Lady Gaga faced down Jimmy Kimmel in what had become the most uncomfortable moment in late-night television. History. You want to know what this job is supposed to be about, Jimmy? Gaga's voice was steady now, but there was steel beneath the silk. It's supposed to be about celebrating creativity, about giving artists a platform to share their work with people who might love it. It's not supposed to be about tearing people down for cheap laughs and viral clips. Jimmy crossed his arms, his own frustration boiling over. Oh, please, spare me the lecture about the noble art of television. You think you're above all this? You think you're too good for the same treatment every other celebrity gets? The same treatment? Gaga laughed bitterly. Jimmy, when was the last time you questioned a male artist's authenticity like this? When was the last time you implied that a man's success was calculated manipulation rather than talent and hard work? Don't make this about gender, Jimmy snapped back. This is about you specifically. It's always about gender when it comes to women in this industry, Gaga shot back. When a man reinvents himself, he's called a visionary. When a woman does it, she's accused of being fake, of being calculating, of losing her way. Jimmy threw his hands up in exasperation. Here we go with the victim complex. You're one of the most successful artists in the world, and you're sitting here acting like you're being oppressed? Victim complex? Gaga's voice rose an octave. Jimmy, you just spent 15 minutes attacking my character on national television, and when I defend myself, you accuse me of playing the victim? Do you hear yourself right now? The band leader shifted uncomfortably in his seat, clearly wishing he was anywhere else. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every moment of the unprecedented meltdown. "I'm not attacking your character," Jimmy insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. "I'm asking legitimate questions that the public wants answered." "The public wants answered?" Gaga stepped closer to his desk. "Or your writers thought would make good television. Because there's a difference, Jimmy, and you know it." Jimmy's face was flushed now, his carefully maintained television persona cracking under pressure. "You know what your problem is, Stephanie? You can't handle criticism. You've been surrounded by yes men for so long that you've forgotten what real feedback sounds like." "Real feedback?" Gaga's voice was incredulous. "Jimmy, you called my Oscar win calculated. You suggested my entire career is a marketing ploy. You questioned my connection to my fans. That's not feedback, that's character assassination. And you're doing it because you know I can't defend myself properly in this format." "You seem to be defending yourself just fine," Jimmy retorted. "Am I? Because every time I try to explain my position, you interrupt me or twist my words. This isn't a conversation, Jimmy, it's an ambush, and we both know it." The audience was completely silent now, some people looking genuinely disturbed by what they were witnessing. This had gone far beyond entertainment into something that felt deeply personal and cruel. Jimmy tried to regain some composure. "Look, if you can't handle the heat of being a public figure, maybe you should have stayed in those dive bars you mentioned." The words hit like a physical blow. Gaga stared at him for a long moment, and when she spoke again, her voice was quiet but filled with a dangerous calm. "Did you just tell me to go back to dive bars because I won't let you humiliate me on television? I'm saying that if you want to be in the public eye, you need to accept that people are going to ask tough questions." "Tough questions?" Gaga's composure finally shattered completely. "Jimmy, tough questions would be about my creative process, about the meaning behind my music, about my experiences as an artist. What you're doing is tabloid harassment dressed up as journalism." Jimmy slammed his hand on his desk, the sound echoing through the studio. "I am not harassing you. I am doing my job as a television host." "Your job is to entertain people, not to tear down your guests for sport," Gaga shouted back, her famous voice projecting perfectly even in anger. "Your job is to create moments that people remember fondly, not moments that make them uncomfortable." "Uncomfortable?" Jimmy laughed harshly. "Lady Gaga, you built your career on making people uncomfortable. The meat dress, the bloodbath performances, the constant shock value. But now when someone makes you uncomfortable, suddenly it's a problem? There's a difference between artistic expression and personal cruelty, Jimmy. And if you can't see that difference, then you have no business hosting a talk show." The studio fell silent except for the hum of the cameras and lights. Even the crew members looked shocked by the intensity of the confrontation. Jimmy stared at her, his chest rising and falling with barely controlled anger. "You know what? I think this interview is over." "I think you're right," Gaga replied, her voice dripping with disdain. "But not because you're ending it. Because I'm done being your punching bag for the evening." She reached for her purse, which had been sitting beside her chair, her movements sharp and decisive. "Where do you think you're going?" Jimmy asked, genuine surprise in his voice. "We're live on television." "I'm leaving," Gaga said simply, slinging her purse over her shoulder. "I came here to talk about my music, my art, my upcoming projects. I didn't come here to be insulted and belittled by someone who clearly has more issues with successful women than he's willing to admit." Jimmy's mouth fell open. "You can't just leave in the middle of a live show." "Watch me," Gaga replied, turning toward the exit. "Security!" Jimmy called out, his voice cracking slightly. "Don't let her leave the set!" Gaga spun around, her eyes blazing. "Are you seriously calling security on me? Because I won't sit here and let you continue this character assassination? You're under contract to finish this interview, Jimmy said desperately, realizing how badly the situation had spiraled out of control. My contract was to appear on your show and promote my work, Gaga shot back. It didn't include being subjected to personal attacks and having my integrity questioned for your entertainment. 2 security guards had appeared at the edges of the set, looking uncertain about what they were supposed to do. The audience was murmuring now, some people calling out encouragement to Gaga, others looking confused and upset. Jimmy looked around, wildly, seeming to realize for the first time that the cameras were still rolling and that this entire meltdown was being broadcast live to millions of viewers. "Stefani, please," he said, his voice taking on a pleading quality. "Let's just sit down and finish this like professionals." Gaga turned back to face him one last time, her expression a mixture of pity and disgust. "Professionals?" Gaga's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Jimmy, professionals don't ambush their guests with personal attacks. Professionals don't call security when someone refuses to be humiliated on national television. And professionals certainly don't try to destroy someone's reputation for entertainment value." The security guard stood frozen, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. One of them spoke quietly into his radio, probably asking for guidance from producers who were undoubtedly in full panic mode. Jimmy's face was red with a mixture of embarrassment and rage. "You think you can just waltz in here and lecture me about professionalism? You're the one throwing a tantrum on live television." "A tantrum?" Gaga's laugh was bitter and sharp. "Jimmy, I defended myself against your attacks with more grace than you deserved. The fact that you're calling it a tantrum just proves exactly what kind of person you really are." The audience was fully engaged now, some people standing up to get a better view, others pulling out their phones despite the no recording policy. This was television history in the making, and everyone could feel it. "What kind of person I really am?" Jimmy's voice cracked with indignation. "I've been nothing but fair to you." "Fair?" Gaga's voice rose to fill the entire studio. "You questioned my authenticity, my talent, my integrity, and my connection to my fans. You suggested my biggest career achievement was fake. You told me to go back to dive bars, and when I refused to sit quietly and take it, you called security on me. If that's your definition of fair, then we have very different dictionaries." Jimmy looked around desperately as if hoping someone would save him from the hole he had dug for himself. The band members were staring at their instruments. The audience was restless, and the cameras kept rolling relentlessly. "The producers are telling me to go to commercial," Jimmy said weakly, touching his earpiece. "Of course they are," Gaga replied. "Because this isn't the sanitized, controlled environment you're used to operating in. This is what happens when you treat a guest with such blatant disrespect that they refuse to play along with your game." "My game?" Jimmy's voice was getting higher with each exchange. "This is my show. You're a guest here, and guests deserve to be treated with basic human dignity," Gaga shot back. "Something you seem to have forgotten in your quest for viral moments and social media buzz." One of the security guards took a tentative step forward. "Ma'am, we're going to need you to return to your seat." Gaga turned to look at him with an expression of pure disbelief. "Are you seriously going to physically prevent me from leaving because I won't participate in this harassment?" The guard looked uncomfortable but stood his ground. "We just need everyone to remain calm and return to their positions." "I am calm," Gaga said, her voice deadly quiet. "I'm also done. Jimmy Kimmel has shown his true colors tonight, and I refuse to be complicit in this circus any longer." Jimmy stood up from behind his desk, his face a mask of barely controlled fury. "You know what, Stephanie? Maybe this is exactly what people need to see. Maybe they need to see what you're really like when you don't get your way." "What I'm really like?" Gaga's voice carried across the studio with perfect clarity. "Jimmy, What people are seeing tonight is what I'm like when someone tries to tear me down for sport. What they're seeing is what happens when a woman refuses to smile and nod while being insulted on national television. You're being completely unreasonable, Jimmy shouted, abandoning any pretense of maintaining his host persona. I'm being unreasonable because I won't let you destroy my reputation for your entertainment? Gaga's voice was incredulous. Jimmy, listen to yourself. You invited me here as your guest, then spent the entire interview attacking me personally, and now you're calling me unreasonable for defending myself. The studio audience was buzzing with conversation now, clearly divided between those supporting Gaga and those who felt she was overreacting. But the energy in the room was electric, everyone sensing they were witnessing something unprecedented. Jimmy ran his hands through his hair, clearly realizing how badly this had gone wrong. Look, maybe we both said things we didn't mean. Can we just sit down and try to salvage this? Gaga stared at him for a long moment, her expression unreadable. When she spoke, her voice was calm but final. Jimmy, the time for salvaging this was about 10 minutes ago, before you questioned my integrity, before you dismissed my achievements, and definitely before you called security on me for refusing to be your verbal punching bag. I didn't call security to hurt you, Jimmy said desperately. I called them because you were leaving in the middle of a live show. And why was I leaving, Jimmy? Gaga asked pointedly. Was it because you were treating me with respect and kindness? Was it because you were giving me a platform to share my art with your audience? Or was it because you turned what should have been a simple interview into a personal attack? Jimmy opened his mouth to respond, then closed it again, seeming to realize that any answer would only make him look worse. Gaga nodded as if his silence confirmed everything she had said. That's what I thought. She turned to address the audience directly, her voice carrying the trained projection of someone who had performed on stages around the world. I want to apologize to everyone who came here tonight expecting to see a normal talk show. You deserved better than this, and so did I. The audience erupted in a mixture of applause and confused murmurs. Some people were clearly on her side. Others seemed uncertain about what they had just witnessed. Jimmy made one last desperate attempt to regain control. Stefani, please just sit down. We can work this out. Gaga looked at him with something that might have been pity. Jimmy, you had your chance to work this out. You had multiple opportunities to treat me with basic respect, and you chose not to take them. This is the consequence of that choice. She walked toward the exit, her heels clicking on the studio floor with each determined step. The security guards looked at each other uncertainly, clearly unsure whether they should actually try to stop her. Ma'am, one of them said hesitantly, we really need you to stay until the end of the show. Gaga stopped and turned back to face him. Are you going to physically restrain me? The guard looked deeply uncomfortable. We're just trying to follow protocol. Protocol? Gaga's eyebrows rose. What's the protocol for when a host verbally abuses his guest on live television? What's the protocol for when someone refuses to participate in their own public humiliation? Jimmy was still standing behind his desk, looking lost and angry. You're making this into something it's not. Am I? Gaga called back to him. Then explain to your audience exactly what you think this was, Jimmy. Explain to them why you thought it was appropriate to question my authenticity, to suggest my Oscar win was fake, to tell me to go back to dive bars. Explain to them why you called security when I refused to sit there and take it. The studio fell silent except for the whispered conversations of audience members and the quiet hum of cameras still capturing every moment. Jimmy's voice was smaller, now defeated. I was just asking questions. No, Jimmy, Gaga said, her voice carrying clearly across the space between them. You were trying to tear me down, and when I wouldn't let you, you showed everyone exactly who you really are. With that, she pushed through the studio doors and disappeared from view, leaving behind a stunned audience, a humiliated host, and what would undoubtedly become the most talked-about moment in late-night television history. Jimmy stood alone, behind his desk, the cameras still rolling, unsure how to proceed. The damage was done, broadcast live to millions of viewers, and there was no taking it back. This wasn't just a bad interview. It was a career-defining moment that would be replayed and analyzed for years to come. And as the reality of what had just happened began to sink in, both for Jimmy and for everyone watching, one thing became crystal clear. Nothing like this had ever happened before, and it would change late-night television forever. What did you think of this unprecedented confrontation? Have you ever seen a celebrity interview go this wrong? Drop your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure to subscribe for more shocking entertainment stories that you won't see anywhere else.